Welcome and good evening, everyone. My name is Christina Olarunda, and I'm the chair of the Loudoun County Public Library Board of Trustees. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the One Book, One Community online program with author Sydney Dunlap. This is our 20th year for our One Book Community Read program, which was funded by a generous gift from former Loudoun resident Erwin Uran, with the stipulation that funds from his gift should be used to help bridge understanding among people. Tonight, we have questions for Sydney that were sent in from library patrons and community members about her book. I actually have a little bowl full of all the questions, and we will also be fielding questions from the chat box. And so if you have any questions, feel free to type them in and we'll hopefully get to all of them by the end of the program. So now it's my pleasure to introduce to you author Sydney Dunlap. Sydney Dunlap is a former elementary school teacher who has worked with at-risk youth in a variety of settings, including at Loudoun County Public Schools, where she worked for over 17 years at Meadowland, Sickland Creek, and Evergreen Mill Elementary Schools. Sydney also served for 2 years as a community educator for a nonprofit organization that works to free youth from trafficking. In writing her debut novel, It Happened on Saturday, Sydney also consulted with the town of Leesburg police on how cases related to internet safety and human trafficking would be handled by law enforcement. As seen in It Happened on Saturday, she enjoys writing heartfelt, hopeful fiction that expands young readers' awareness of tough topics. She is a member of the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators, is a published poet, and has also written for a newspaper. Just last month, It Happened on Saturday was awarded the gold medal in the category of preteen fiction, mature issues in the Moonbeam Children's Book Awards. Welcome, Sydney, and congratulations on your award.
Thank you so much. It is so nice to be here. It's really an honor, and I just really appreciate your having me.
You are more than welcome, and thank you. As many of you might know, that Sydney used to live here for obviously almost 2 decades, or probably maybe even longer. So she is a Loudoner. And so, Sydney, before we get started, why don't you tell us a little bit about how you transitioned from being a teacher for almost 2 decades to now in an award-winning author?
Okay, thank you. Well, I've always loved writing. So writing was always, ever since I was a little kid and went outside on a pretty spring day and came home and wrote a poem about it. I've always just enjoyed writing. I wrote in a journal a lot growing up. And teaching writing was always really fun for me when I was working in the classroom. And I guess I joined Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators many, many years ago. And I got very involved with that organization. The Mid-Atlantic region here, it's Virginia and DC, is a wonderful, very active chapter. I met lifelong friends who I've known forever now that we've been in a writers group, and we still meet right every week because we're spread out all over the country now, so we can meet over Zoom. So I was very involved in that, and I became a conference coordinator also for that organization and got to go to all these events and meet editors and I guess learn the craft of writing and go on lots of novel revision retreats. It's so many things when you're trying to learn. For any aspiring writers out there, there's just so many really fun things that you can do where you're studying the craft, but you're also building relationships with others in the writing community. So I was kind of doing all that for a long time. But then what happened, I was teaching at Sickland Creek, 3rd grade, and I think when the seed of the idea for this book started, I was flipping channels one night before going to sleep, just watching a little TV, and I came across a movie that showed kids hardly older than my students just being screamed at and thrown into a van. And it was really disturbing. And I stayed up and watched the whole thing to see what it was. And it was talking about child trafficking. And that's when I decided, if this is happening, I really hadn't ever honestly thought about it. And after seeing that, I just knew that if this is happening in the world while I'm in it, I'm going to get involved. I'm going to start fighting it. This is just a horrible thing. And it wasn't too much after that that my husband was transferred to the Houston area for work. And instead of going back to full-time teaching when we moved, I decided I would tutor kids and keep teaching in that capacity, but have a little more time to get involved in the fight against child trafficking. So in doing that, I learned a lot about it. And I learned also that so many cases start online. The most recent year where we have the data from 2021 Polaris Project says that 65% of the cases, of the known cases, did originate online. And during that time, a 12-year-old girl in my suburb was talking to somebody online who she thought was just another girl her age. And the girl was showing all these pictures playing soccer. And they were just talking about, oh, we should meet sometime at the park and play soccer. So this girl was very unsuspecting. She thought she had this great friendship with another person her age. And she went to the park and her parents dropped her off. And as soon as they were gone, this man who was in his 40s threw her into a van and abducted her. And she was trafficked for 10 days before he actually left her at the side of the road because there had been so many Amber Alerts. He did not want to, get caught because her name and picture were all over the news. But when I heard that story, this was a kid who truly was not trying to do anything remotely dangerous. She was just thought she was talking to somebody online and thought she had made a new friend. And then this happened to her. Mm-hmm. So I just decided, that just gave me the resolve. I'm going to write a book that will be kid friendly and age appropriate, but show young readers how easily things can go wrong on social media, and show them through going on this journey with a character, how traffickers operate, how recruiters operate, how people manipulate others into trusting them and are able to lure them into dangerous situations. Because I just think if kids are armed with that knowledge and they know what to look for, they can be very aware as they go online, as they use social media and out in the real world too, so that they can hopefully make informed decisions and just know, so that they can be careful and hopefully avoid getting into a dangerous situation. So I guess the long answer to your question is that I was studying writing all this time. I was teaching kids, and when all these things kind of just came together, I thought this is the book that I need to write. This is something that I need to share with the world.
Right. It sounds like the educator in you wanted to be able to share this with people that you were obviously teaching, young kids. So like you said, it's very much a friendly read, right? It's well written, and it certainly can be relatable in terms of the characters that are there. So, as a former Loudner, tell us your connection to the One Book, One Community program.
Absolutely. So my writers group that I mentioned before, and I would go to these programs, and I always loved getting to meet an author that I heard of and read their book. And I have to say my favorite one was Marcus Zuzak, who is the author of The Book Thief. I will never forget how inspiring his talk was. We stayed afterwards and made sure we were at the end of the line so that we weren't holding anyone up, so that we could talk a little bit more to him. And he was saying that he actually wrote The Book Thief 11 different times from 11 different points of view, because he had to get it right. And so he finally settled on the point of view of death, but that was the 11th one that he came up with, and it worked beautifully. And it was so worth it to keep writing it because he just really got it right. So I never forgot that. as I was writing draft after draft and changing this and changing that and just switching things around, it was just something that I kept in my head the whole time. If he can write his book 11 times and his book is a lot longer than mine, then I'm not going to complain if I have to write another draft here and another draft there. I just found it really inspiring. And I also think it's part of that lesson that if you want to do something right, you have to work hard at it. It's not going to come easily, and it's worth it to put the work in.
I think that is so beautiful that it's almost like a full circle, the circle that, you were a patron, right? That was in the community picking up the book from the library to read it. And now today you're the author sitting here being interviewed with your book that's impacting and around the community. So I think that's wonderful. And so all of you who are out there listening, that you could be the next Sydney that's sitting here with your book for the one book, one community. So be inspired because I think these things are fantastic and they're useful, right? They're pertinent to our community. So without further ado, let's get to some questions that we have from the community, both within the schools, patrons. And so I'm going to have my little bowl here and just pull out some questions. So the first one that we have here is from a student at Belmont Ridge Middle School. And it says, how have your life and work experiences influenced you as a writer?
Well, I think I may have answered some of that when I was talking before a little bit, working as a teacher and then also being a member of Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators and studying the craft of writing at the same time, and then going into the volunteer work with the anti-trafficking. I think all of those things have really come together to help influence what I wanted to write about. And also, I'd say the age of the kids I wanted to write for, because I think the topic that I wanted to write about, I couldn't find it in my teaching anywhere. I couldn't find any books on this topic. I couldn't find, anything addressing this. And so that's when I said I need to just write it, because I think kids this age are the ones that need this the most, because the 11 to 14-year-olds are such a vulnerable age.
Mhm.
And that's why I think they need, before or during the time that they're so vulnerable, I think they need this information. So I kind of put it all together and decided to write a middle grade on this topic.
All right. Okay. All right. So our next question is just from the public. Is the character Julia inspired by someone you know?
She's not. Julia is just a character that I came up with for the story, so I'm not basing her on anyone. I will say, though, as a writer, sometimes you find a lot of yourself going into, especially when you're writing in first person. I do love animals the way Julia does. I do love horses and I do have cats. I will say the cats in the story were modeled after my two cats. So that they are, and one of the horse Brandy in the story is actually modeled after a horse that I rode when I was a kid, when I was first learning to ride horses.
Right.
But so Julia definitely has some qualities, I think, that I've, or some things from her life that I've brought in a little bit from my own life. I'm also vegetarian. Julia's vegetarian. But otherwise, she's not specifically supposed to be anyone. The rest of it is just, yeah, just a fictional character.
I loved how our dad was always experimenting with different dishes, different types of food to create. So I thought that was an interesting touch, that brought him a little bit more to life. So it was neat.
Oh, good. I'll say about that, my husband is a very creative cook, and he's always experimenting and trying to make fun things. And we watch Master Chef together sometimes, so that kind of, again, a little bit of life coming into a story and
Right.
bringing in things that really have nothing to do with the main plot line, but I think round out a story more.
Right. Right. Absolutely. All right. Our next question is from a student at Harmony Middle School.
Mhm.
It says, what inspired you to be a teacher?
Oh, well, when I was a little kid, I used to take my stuffed animals and put them in a circle. and pretend they were my students, and they would all talk and have personalities, and sometimes they, one would get in trouble a lot, and one would be always the teacher's helper. And I think I always, I would play that way just for fun, when I was young. And I think it was just kind of in me to be a teacher ever since I was really little. I just always liked, doing that. And I mean, when I was really little, not
Right.
too long, but I think it was just kind of part of my personality that I liked being in that role. And then when I went to college, I did go as an undecided major, and it was actually halfway through college that I needed to figure out what I was going to major in. And I don't know, something just clicked, and I thought, I'd love to teach kids. But then I was like, that makes sense. When I told my mom about it, she's like, of course you're going to be a teacher. You used to do that from, age like 4 to 7. That's like all you would do is in your room, you'd sit and pretend to be a teacher. So obviously, so.
Right. Good. Well, good. All right. So next question is from a student from Belmont Ridge Middle School. She says, explain Julia's reasons at the end of the novel for sharing her personal story with others.
Okay. So I think a big part of her journey is that she is starting out so concerned about belonging and fitting in and not getting left out. And as the story goes along, those things are still important to her, but she starts to realize what's more important is telling the truth about what happened. When her friends start talking about, oh, we're going to meet people online, we're going to do what you did, because they don't know what really happened, she has to make a decision. Am I going to fit in at all costs? Or am I going to be the person I want to be, the person I know I can be, and be courageous and tell them? And I think the stakes are pretty high for her, because she thinks, they may just not want to be friends anymore, not be allowed to be friends anymore. And she has to kind of risk everything to be courageous and to tell them. And she, I think, knows when she's in the scene in the cornfield, I think that's her moment of reckoning with herself, that she decides, I'm going to do what I know is right, and the way I can feel like I handle this, in the way that would protect everyone else, because I can't take a chance on something happening to them.
Right, right, right. All right. So the next question is, how can we keep loved ones safe from trafficking?
Well, I think being informed first and foremost. I think that kids need to know that there are people out there who unfortunately are looking for unsuspecting kids. So I think it's very important when they go online. I think they need to know that you can't assume somebody is actually who they say they are. I think that's first and foremost. People can say anything online and try to make you believe anything. So they need to know that. And I think they need to know that if they don't have a connection with someone in real life, they shouldn't be talking to them, because that person could be trying to gain information about them. And that person, could be up to no good. I also think it's important that kids realize, if somebody tries to keep a relationship a secret or doesn't want their parents to know about it for some reason, that's never a good sign.
Right.
And I think they should be very wary if somebody says something. You can't trust somebody who's trying to keep something a secret. I think they also need to be careful about not posting their exact location if they hang out a certain place with their friends. I just don't think it's a good idea for kids to be putting themselves out there that way, where somebody might say, oh, I know where you and your friends are, and there's no parent around you. Like, I think they need to just really be cognizant about what information they're sharing, because kids can go online and talk with their friends and enjoy, sharing pictures and things like that. But they just need to realize this is also a place where there are people who are up to no good, and that's where they're looking. And in real life as well, I think kids need to be careful, where they are, in public places, just being aware if their parents aren't around, just being cognizant of their surroundings and being careful who they talk to and how they interact.
Mm. All right. So the next question is, was writing some parts of the book harder than others?
That's a good question. I think so. I think I have to say, like, the scenes at the stable were so much fun to write because being, as I said, being a horse lover, those just were like, oh, let me go back to the stable and think about that. The scene in the hotel room, I would say that was the one I probably spent the most time on in the whole book because I thought that just had to be done really carefully because Julia needed to be in danger, but she also, I thought, needed to get out pretty quickly
Right.
so that you could kind of follow her there and see how it all could happen, but then let her get away
Right.
fast. So I really tried to balance letting it be a little scary, but not taking it too far and making it too scary.
Okay. All right. So the next question we have is, what was the process of getting the book published like for you?
Okay, well, I definitely wrote a few drafts, and
Mm.
it's always so important. Any aspiring writers out there, you always want other people to get a look at your book and give you their opinions because sometimes in your own head everything makes perfect sense, but if somebody else is not in your head and they're reading it, they may say, oh well, this is confusing here, or I don't really understand this part here. You always just want to get some different opinions as you're writing it. So I shared with my writers group and other friends who wanted to read it and took their feedback, which was really helpful. And then what happened for me, to get a book traditionally published, you have to get an agent in most cases, not every single case, but most of the time. And I was able to go to a Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators event in Houston where there was an agent speaking. And I had the opportunity to tell her a little bit about my book. And it was interesting because honestly, I wanted to just kind of ask somebody in the publishing industry, do you think that a book that tackles this topic for middle graders, like what do you think about that? Because I knew there wasn't anything like it, and I just wanted her opinion. And she said, if you will send that to me, I will clear off my desk and I will read it immediately. She was
Wow.
familiar with the trafficking situation and very familiar with the fact that there just hasn't, that just really hadn't been handled for this age group. And I was talking to her about why I thought it was important to get a book for this age group. So I was still working on it. It wasn't finished yet. But she said, as soon as you're done, please send it to me. And it was a pretty amazing because she ended up signing me in 2 days. She really was true to her word and she read it immediately. So usually, it's a much different process. I have to say, I was very, very fortunate that I connected with the right person, I think, at the right time.
Right.
Um, and then she and I worked quite a bit on revisions, and I actually ended up adding the entire part two. The whole second half came afterwards. Like she read the first part, but we realized we needed to get the aftermath and the whole process of recovering from trauma in that book, because that's really an important part of it too.
Right. Well, for all of you who are listening out there, I think there's two big things that Sydney has mentioned is one, she's been part of organizations that she's, and within a like-minded groups, right, of writers, and having that network. And then actually stepping out and saying, hey, this is my idea. What do you think? And so I think that's just a good pro tip, if you will, for those who are aspiring, is that get into those networks. You're never too young, and I don't think you're ever too old to step out and do that and take that risk, because you never know what's going to happen. Because like in your case, you said you didn't even finish the book yet, but someone was definitely very interested and obviously, like you said, true to her word to ultimately, sign you on, which I think is amazing. And so I have a question for you with that. That I know you had mentioned that there was the second part of the book, which I found personally very fascinating, that it didn't end at the climax that, that
Mhm.
Julia got away and there you go, but it really dealt with how did this impact the entire family? And how do we as a family move forward? It wasn't just Julia who was impacted, right? It was the mother, it was the father, it was her sister, and how to move forward with that. So what made you decide to go ahead and write that portion and really delve into those important issues that a family would have to deal with?
Well, my agent and I were talking about it, and just the idea about the full character arc. One of the questions before about why Julia decided to tell everyone,
Mhm.
when we're talking about that part, I think you can have a book that's just kind of plot driven, where here's what happened and here are the events, and then here's the climax, here's the resolution. Or if you want to make it really character driven, you've got to get the character's entire arc.
Mhm.
And I think to do that in this story, we needed to show the aftermath and how the experience really changed Julia, and how it affected her relationships at school and with her family, and ultimately with herself, as she made that hard decision at the end that, yes, I'm going to tell no matter what effect it has.
All right. Okay. All right, let's go on to the next question. How did you choose the title for the book?
Okay, so in fact, the title was not originally, it happened on Saturday. The title I had at first, it's kind of funny actually. This will share a little bit about the editing process. What was Chasing Alligators? Okay, which you might think of an Australian adventure book or something like that, right? But what happened, I originally started the book sooner when Julia and her family were on vacation in Florida. And there was this whole scene at the very beginning where there was this alligator in the water, and she's like really nervous, but she and her cousin are sitting on a dock, and they're like the cousin is trying to see if she can get the alligator to swim closer. And it was like sort of a metaphor for being in a dangerous situation, I think. And anyway, then when the book ended up with the scene where she and her father are talking, and her father is telling her about the time that he really did kind of have to chase that alligator back into the lake, I got my alligators back in the story, but kind of in a different context.
Right.
And I thought, okay, well, still chasing alligators is sort of a metaphor for facing your fear.
Mhm.
And so I kept it, even though that first scene was long gone. When you write, sometimes I must have gotten that whole Florida part. My agent said, you don't need that. Let's start back in Virginia. This is kind of backstory. It's good for you to know where she was and what was going on, but you don't need all this. So that was very helpful. It's so helpful when you get people to just say, just chop it, hit delete for a whole lot of pages. But what happened? So my editor, once I had a publication contract, she said, well, I feel like people are going to get the wrong idea about the story. They're going to think, like I said, Australian outback, animal adventure, whatever. And I could totally see that. I think my metaphor was, maybe a little bit where you wouldn't figure it out until the very end, and you might pick it up thinking you're going to get a very different book. So I
Right.
thought that was really, really good advice on her part. Um, so that's when it was like, okay, well, let's figure out a title for this book. And I actually was talking to my nephew, who is in high school, and he's very creative and does like filmmaking and things. And I was talking to him about, and he said, well, if you can think of a title that raises a question, that's a really good idea. And I was trying to figure it out. I wanted to kind of get at, something happened and she didn't want to tell anybody what happened. And so it just kind of brainstorming, writing down different ideas, and then the idea that it happened on Saturday. Hopefully, then readers will say, well, what happened on Saturday? And then hopefully
Mhm.
they'll pick up the book to see what it was that happened on Saturday.
Right. Right. Now, did you choose the graphics of the book of what the cover looks like, or was that something that was done by the publishers?
Well, it's so interesting because I'm in a debut group of authors, and we've all kind of compared stories. And it sounds like a lot of times you just get a cover.
Right.
Um, but my publisher is very much like of the school. We really want our authors to just really adore their cover and be really satisfied with it, which is so wonderful. So I was allowed to give a cover concept. And to do that, my best friend from childhood is a librarian. And I called her immediately and I said, okay, we got to come up with a cover concept. And so we just brainstormed together, and we wanted to really focus on the hope and the healing and the positive message of the story versus anything more dangerous or anything that felt scary. Because I think if you know that a book is talking about social media safety, and you kind of understand that there's going to be some darker, content there, then if the cover is reflecting that as well, it just feels like it might not show the other parts of the story and how the story really ends on a message of hope and a very positive message and a positive ending. So I was trying to think about putting it where you can see Julia. She's in the shadow. The light and the shadow were kind of a big thing. She's in the shadow, but yet she's got a choice she can make. The gate is open. She can choose to go up the windy path. It's not going to be easy, but she can choose to go up it. And then if you see the light, it's very light and bright at the end, and she can come to a much better place. So it's kind of symbolic of that. But I also just wanted the cover to be inviting. And I wanted it to be pretty, to be honest. I wanted one that I could hang on my wall. My agent gave me a beautiful poster of it that I framed that I have in my study where I work, and I just wanted something really pretty too. So
That's nice.
They were wonderful, and they gave me 11 different artists to choose from
Oh, that's amazing.
to do the cover design and just to share that concept and be involved all through the process.
That is wonderful. It sounds like you had a really good experience overall in writing this book
Mm-hmm.
and the process of getting it published. So
Mm-hmm.
that is
Oh
awesome.
yeah.
All right. Next question is, has anyone approached you for the movie rights to your book yet?
Not yet. No.
All right. Well, anyone out there that's listening that knows anyone, I mean, I'm sure that Sydney would be open and to that proposition. So,
Hmm.
all right. This one is from a student at Harmony Middle School. How long does it take to write a book?
That's an interesting question. I would say it kind of just depends on the person and their schedule and how much time they have, I think, because some people are writing with full-time jobs where they're only going to be able to write if they squeeze it in before work or after work or on the weekends. And other people are writing full-time that is what they're doing.
Right.
And then you've got people that are working part-time in writing, and so there's they just kind of depends on your schedule as far as how many months it would take, I would say.
Right.
But I think it's very unusual for somebody to write a book quickly. Now, this is National Novel Writing Month, I should say, NaNoWriMo. And I know that goal is that people actually write a novel in a month, and it's called fast drafting. I'm not a fast drafter, so I can't speak to that. I admire it, and others I can't do it. I have to go slowly. I have to take my time when I write. So, for a lot of people, we have in the publishing world, we talk about plotters who write everything out kind of in advance. They figure out an outline, they know exactly what's going to happen, they have their climax, they have their resolution, they have their rising action, they've got it all planned out. And then we have pantsers, which are people who fly by the seat of their pants, where they might have a good idea of their character and their character's goal and how their character is going to end up, but you don't know exactly how they're going to get there.
Right.
That's me. I'm much more of a pantser. So I kind of figure out my story as I'm writing it, if
Right.
that makes sense.
Right.
Although I know my character and I know where they will eventually be, but I find out kind of as I go along how they're going to get
I
there.
see.
So I think that
Now,
takes longer.
now you were obviously a teacher. So what subject did you teach? I know elementary school typically it's sort of more broad, but what sort of subject did you teach when you were a teacher?
So when I was teaching fourth grade at Meadowland, it was many of the years it was all subjects. We did have a really wonderful team, and we were able to compartmentalize a little bit. Our principal let us. We had a great principal as well, and we just decided, there were four of us, and we said, let's try something different this year. One person is gonna do social studies, one person will do science for all of us, and we just kind of swapped it out. And of course, I did English creative writing that year, and spelling, and just did all the writing for the whole grade level. But most years I taught every subject.
Interesting. Interesting. It's good. Now I know Julia's mother is a teacher. Was there any inspiration from you in that character, or sort of your experiences overall as a teacher?
Oh, well, setting up the classroom, she has that scene where she's setting up the classroom. That was, my daughter would come and help me set up my classroom before, when school was getting ready to start, and just kind of the little details of what the classroom looks like at the beginning of the year, and just sort of how busy things are for teachers when school is starting,
Right.
when you've just got so much going on. I think that kind of found its way into the story also.
That's good. All right. Our next question, I can open it. It says human trafficking is a weighty, tough topic. How did you figure out how to depict it for middle grade readers?
I think very deliberately and very intentionally, as I was writing, I just tried to think about, as a mom and as a teacher, what would I be okay with a kid that age who's in my care reading? And kind of, especially as I mentioned before with that hotel room scene, like how to get her in danger and how to get her out very quickly, so you can feel the danger and understand there's danger, but not go any further than needed.
Right.
There, just let her get out.
Right.
And I think that was just kind of on my mind the whole time. How can kids understand what they need to understand about how easily things can go wrong, but not dwell there?
Right. Okay, good. Let's see. Our next question is, are there any specific places in Loudoun County you were visualizing when you wrote the book, or any experiences you had while living here that influenced the plot?
See, well, I think just the whole sort of setting in general of, you've got the mall where we've got, our malls that are a little bit further in, and then you go out, out to your suburbs. I was probably thinking about that a little bit because I know the mall does figure in quite a bit. Um, and I think just kind of the suburban setting, just where the houses are in relation to each other and in relation to the school. I was kind of picturing, I think when I was talking about her going in and setting up the school, I was kind of picturing my most recent classroom and sort of how that school is set. I think I did describe it as being at the top of a big hill when they were going up. I'm like, because I was, you picture things from your past. So I was kind of picturing that whole area down near Sickling Creek.
Gotcha. Okay. Let's see. Our next question says, if you had to choose next year's One Book, One Community title, what are some thought-provoking titles you think would be a good community read?
Oh, what a good question. Wow, that's well, I have a friend, I'm in a debut group of other middle grade debut authors, and I'm reading a lot of their books right now, and they're just amazing. So I'm thinking, Meg Hyatt has written a book that's really good. It's called Good Different, and it's about someone who's on the spectrum, and just kind of learning about that, and learning how to celebrate their differences, and also how to share their needs and advocate for themselves. So that's one that comes to mind as a really good one. I've also read, there's a wonderful book called Turtles of the Midnight Moon by Maria Jose Fitzgerald, and it's an eco mystery set in Honduras, and it's just a beautiful story about these girls that are helping turtles and working. It's an environmental story. And there's another one I'm thinking of called Indigo and Ida by Heather Murphy Capps, who actually lives in the DC area. And it's a book that's got a little bit of magic with Ida B. Wells writing letters, and a girl, a modern day girl who's kind of using those letters to help uh, in righting a wrong that she's finding at her school, and help her find an individual ability to engage in some activism. So those are three that come to mind.
That's awesome. Well,
Yeah.
we have a question from the chat. And so
Okay.
our audience member says, do you have other books you are working on at the moment?
Yeah,
Oh,
I do. Mhm.
yay.
Mhm.
That's good. So do you have more than one or just one that you're working on right now?
I have one main one, but I think a lot of authors have other things too that every so often you might have to jump over and work on a little bit.
That's good.
So yeah, a lot of times you have a few irons in the fire, but like kind of one main one.
All right, that's great. So we'll be on the lookout for
Mm.
a new book from you soon, it sounds like.
Mm.
It's good. All right. So this, I think you might have answered this, but we'll ask it again. So it's from a student at Belmont Ridge Middle School. It says, what are some red flags that can signal a trafficking situation?
Okay, well, we can't talk about this too much because I think it's so important that
Yeah.
kids hear this. So if we do repeat, I think it's okay. I agree. I think if somebody is trying to keep a relationship a secret, that's a huge red flag. If somebody is, well, here's one thing we didn't talk about. If somebody promises you something that sounds too good to be true, sometimes people will say things like, "Oh, I'm shooting a music video and I need somebody that looks just like you." And we could say, "Oh, yeah, right." But sometimes they can be very convincing, or say something like that just would seem like, "Oh, wow, you really want me to be a model for whatever." So you've got to stop and say, "No, wait a minute. If there's any validity to that, your parents would be involved from the beginning. You'd have to sign a contract. Your parents would have to sign something if you're under 18. So you just have to remember, if somebody says something that just does not sound like it could be true, and even if you want it to be, you have to really assume that it's not. Um, if somebody is trying to isolate a person and isn't okay meeting their family, isn't okay being around their friends, that's another huge red flag. um Traffickers will try to become whoever you want them to be. They say that traffickers are often called street psychologists because when they meet runaways, for example, on the street, they can tell just within 30 seconds, is this person looking for a father figure? Is this person looking for a friend? Is this person looking for a romantic relationship? They can sum up what that person is looking for and suddenly try to become that in how they interact with you. So if you have a person that you can tell is just acting like, oh, they're so interested and they're asking all these questions, and the way that Tyler just kind of became exactly what Julia wanted, it just seems a little bit like, wait a minute, what's, a little bit suspicious, I think, sometimes.
Right. Right. All right. Let's see. Um, Next question says, how did being a teacher help you with the writing process?
Well, I was always telling my kids, revise, revise, revise. You have to keep revising. So you have to tell yourself that too, for sure. Another thing too, when you're teaching, you tell the kids always pick a word that you think is the best possible word. For example, when you're doing verbs, you could just, we always tell the kids, if you're saying a person walked across the room, well, what's a more interesting descriptive way, to say that? You could just have something very basic happening, or you could make it a little bit snazzy or a little bit more specific. And I think that's something when you're revising your own writing, you go back and do the same thing, where if you're going to say, you could kind of take it the way you have it, or you could find a word that might be just a little bit more precise.
Right. All right. So the next question I have, it says, I thought the role of shame and embarrassment in Julia's story and how it tormented her was especially relevant to teens today. When bad things happen, they don't want to tell anyone, especially friends and parents. What would you say to someone who maybe has experienced something like this in their life? Maybe someone met someone who turned out not to be who they thought, or something worse happened and they don't want to tell anyone. So it sounds like it's maybe not as serious as an abduction or attempted abduction or to traffic, but just the person wasn't who they purported to be. What would you say about that?
I would say that, as Julia's dad tells her, these people are experts in manipulation, and people that, not just traffickers, but others that might be conning somebody for whatever reason. It's almost like a job for them. They know how to con people. They know exactly how to do it. So don't, I mean, you don't want to ever tell someone how to feel, but understand that they are an expert in manipulating. So try not to feel bad that they caught you, because that they just know exactly how to do it.
Gotcha. Okay. Let's see. Next questions, it says, well, are you working on a new book? We had that question. If so, can you tell us what it's about?
Well, I'll say this. I'm working on something that would be for the same sort of readership, same sort of age group, and also dealing with a tough topic. But I don't think I can go into too much detail.
Sure, sure.
Yeah, but
It's intriguing.
same genre,
Gotcha.
but
Okay.
it's different topic.
All right. So next question says, what parts of the book did you especially enjoy writing or developing?
Well, I was talking before about the horse stuff. That's just fun for me because I love the horses. It just kind of takes me to a barn, in my imagination. And the scenes with the animals. And I also really enjoyed writing the scenes between Julia and Nori. Even though some of them were, when they got into their argument and were kind of struggling in their friendship. I think the scene when Julia and Nori are sitting on the bus toward the end, and they really talk honestly for the first time, and they realize that their friendship is just worth everything. That just, it kind of brought me to tears when I was writing it, because I've had the same best friend ever since fourth grade.
Mhm.
And I think I drew on a lot of that emotion of just friendship is just, so it can just be everything, in your life, and I just saw them as they're going to have the same friendship that my friend and I have. And so I really enjoyed writing that one. And one other scene I really liked writing was when Julia went to the barn for the first time after
Mhm.
everything happened.
Mhm.
And it was just her and the horses in the barn, and she just finally could let go, and she could just hug that horse, Brandy, and just get out all those feelings.
All right.
I liked that one a lot. And I had an experience when I went to a barn and there was no one there, and the person had said, you can go in. I was meeting somebody, and so I was the only person there, and all the horses kind of turned and looked at me the way they did with Julia. And this is after I had written that scene, I have to say. But going in, and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm living out a scene from my books. The horses are all looking at me and I'm the only one here. I'm like, hi guys. So that was pretty fun.
That's awesome. That's
Yeah.
awesome. Well, we have another live question. Says, what authors have inspired you, especially children's and young adult authors?
Well, I have to say, Catherine Patterson, Bridge to Terabithia, The Great Gilly Hopkins, those were books that I read many, many years ago. And I've gone back to so many times over the years because I felt like she was so real and never, ever talked down to her reader or tried to sugarcoat things. She just always dealt with reality and in a compassionate, hopeful way, but was never like afraid to go to a dark place either. And so I have to say, I think she really inspired me as a way to be able to deal with a tough topic, but keep that element of hope.
Right.
And I when I was in I think it was fourth grade. I was reading a Ramona book, those Beverly Cleary books. I just adored them. And I want to say that's when I really fell in love with reading.
Mhm.
We used to have I can't say it, sustained silent reading time at
Right.
school.
Mhm.
And I just did not want that to end. I just couldn't wait to get home and finish my little adventure in Ramona's head. So
It's good. Yeah, and it seems like in your book, there are several topics that I think are important to address. I mean, obviously you have her friend Nori who's dealing with the split of her family and how she's dealing with that and finding someone to connect with, right, when she goes off to camp. You obviously have Julia and her sister, the sort of age difference where her older sister's like, look, I just want to go and hang out with my boyfriend and, sort of do that and don't necessarily always have time, for you. And then I think even overall, you're also seeing how is Julia handling all of those changes that everyone has, where her father's busy with work, her mother's busy with work, her sister's busy with, just other activities, and obviously her friend is as well. It's like, how do you handle those changes that happen as you go along in life? And so I do find that your book was very inspirational and hopeful, because at the end, it's not perfect, but it's hopeful, right? It's saying, look, we can grow through this. So what inspired you to be that type of writer where you are giving hope and inspiration?
well, I think the books that I love the most are books that have the hope and the inspiration. And another book I really like is by Joan Bauer. It's called Hope Was Here, actually is the title.
Mhm.
And it's about a girl who's been through a lot of really hard things. But again, she always finds that hope and she always finds that reason to be optimistic, even through challenges. So I thought it would be important um, as a writer to keep that for readers because the world is a tough place and
Sure.
we
Sure.
can turn to books and we can learn from them and we can escape into them.
Right.
But I think ultimately, if we can walk away from reading a book with a feeling of some optimism and a
Right.
feeling of, things can be really hard, but they can also be okay.
Right.
They can
Right.
also work out.
Perfect. All right. Well, I think we'll take a couple more questions here. What advice do you have for fellow writers?
I would say, I have a few things. I would say find other writers and you will really, I think, benefit from reading each other's work and critiquing each other's work and just the bonds that you can share as you study your craft. I would say definitely, yeah, getting that feedback. And I would say know that it's not easy. The publishing industry is notoriously difficult to break into for sure. And you have to understand that it's just not something, at least if anybody's ever done it, I don't know them, where you can just say, I'm going to write a book and sit down and write it. And there you have it. It takes so much work and so much persistence and perseverance. And you fall down and you get back up and you fall down and you get back up. And you just, I think, have to know that from the beginning so that you just understand. Some people say, I remember hearing that unless you have back in the day when editors sent rejection letters, now everything is virtual, it's
Right.
just emails. But when you would get a rejection letter, everybody said you have to have enough rejection letters to wallpaper your bathroom before you can even consider that you're going to ever get an acceptance. And that's, I mean, I think you have to realize that that's honestly the case, that it's a learning curve and you kind of start out not really knowing much at all about it and you gradually learn and start to study the craft and improve, but then it becomes okay, I'm starting to understand like a little bit more about it, but now I've got to refine and polish and continue to grow my skills. And I think it just, I would also say just reading in the genre you like is another good thing to do. You
Mhm.
can really learn a lot from reading books that are the kinds of things you want to write about. Just understanding how to structure a story, how to open a book. You can read 10 different first chapters and just kind of do your own little study of like, how did this draw the reader in? How did this make the person not want to put it down? How did they introduce the main character and the problem and get all those things you need to do in a first chapter? So I think you can really self-study, but also study with others.
Right. And it seems like there's an element of perseverance, right? That you have to
Mhm.
be able to continue to move forward. And in the book, you see that with Julia when she's going through the group therapy, that, she doesn't want to be a part of this, right? She just wants to sort of leave it alone and not deal with it. But through that, it obviously it helps her, but she has to persevere through that. So it sounds like it's something, in life, right? That's sort of like a skill, if you will, to have, is to be able
Mhm.
to persevere, whatever your circumstance happens to be, and have that hope, right? Like in your books, to have that hope to say, it is going to improve, it is going to be better. So, well, thank you so much, Sydney.
Mhm.
We are out of time, but I wanted to thank you and Susan Van Epps and her entire team for organizing this discussion. And all of the attendees who attended tonight, thank you for your time. So Sydney will also be presenting at the Rust Library at 1 p.m. this Saturday. So if you want to meet her in person and hear her presentation, feel free to come out. And you will also have an opportunity to have your book signed by Sydney. So please come out on Saturday at 1 o'clock at the Rust Library. So Sydney, do you have any final words for us before we end our program?
Well, I just want to thank everybody for coming out tonight. I really appreciate your taking the time. And I just want to thank the Loudon Library System again, and thank you for welcoming me here and having me here. Again, it's just such an honor to be a part of this program. And it's just really warms my heart to think that so many people have read Julia's story now. And I'm just, I'm just so appreciative of this opportunity. And I'm really looking forward to Saturday. So I hope to see lots of people on Saturday and get to meet a lot of you in person as well.
Oh, perfect. Well, thank you again, Sydney. And so, on behalf of the Library Board of Trustees, Director Lou, and the Loudoun County Public Library staff, we want to thank everyone and have a good night. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.